Hi everyone, my name is Kamisha Bruce and we are ready to have today's webinar. It's titled Fireside Chat, Medical Device Security is a Joint Effort, and it will be presented by Michael S. Brilling of Dartmouth-Hitchcock and Benjamin B. Stock of Ordr. My name is Kamisha Bruce. I am currently Acting Chief of Biomedical Engineering at the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center. I currently serve as the Secretary of ACCE, and I graduated from Mississippi State University and the University of Rochester with my master's. Logistics for today's meeting. All attendees will have their microphones muted. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box at any time, and I'll be fielding those throughout the webinar. If you have any urgent issues, please use the chat feature to communicate with all the panelists. And please remember to complete the webinar evaluation at the end of the meeting. The link will be provided at the end. So today's speakers are Michael S. Brilling, who's a mechanical engineer who started out working on large data center thermal efficiency. He spent several years in finance, Unix system administration, and security. Since he's worked in healthcare, he's worked as a BMAT clinical engineer and is now a manager. Benjamin Stock is the Director of Healthcare Product Management at Ordr. Previously, Ben worked as the Director of Clinical Equipment Systems and Project Support at SSM Health in St. Louis, Missouri. With more than 15 years of experience in healthcare technology management, his wealth of knowledge in the clinical engineering space allows him to be a wonderful advocate for Ordr healthcare customers. Ben is also a CBAT. So, I want to say thanks to Ben and Mike for agreeing to present today, and I'll hand over the presentation to them.
Thank you, Kamisha, for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate your time today. So today I'm not gonna read this to you because everybody can read, but we're gonna talk about some challenges in the healthcare space, specifically around IoT, the Internet of Things, and IoMT, the Internet of Medical Things. And the inability to adapt security protocols to these devices that are mainly designed to protect OS-based systems, and what we can do as a group of individuals to help protect these devices, and some of the different things that have been done throughout our industry to do so. Michael will be joining me to help us through this conversation, and hopefully we will have some conversation that you can enjoy and get information that you can take back and utilize in your day-to-day activities. Next slide, please. This is kind of a representation of what a lot of us see in our daily lives. 20,000 different manufacturers, resellers, and distributors of medical devices. On average, 17 devices per hospital bed in a normal hospital. Thousands of legacy devices with old operating systems that are there's no longer patches available for, or ways to properly protect them. And traditional cybersecurity capabilities have a hard time with these types of devices. You know, you can't deploy an antivirus on a lot of these, and there's just some very difficult things that you have to deal with managing these types of devices. Next slide, please. These are some of the key players, and I'm assuming most of the participants on the phone call are biomed related at this point in time. We might have dragged in some security and network people, but leadership on here is a key one. We have to get leadership buy-in, or none of this works, because they're the ones that control the finances, and there is going to be some costs to some of these plans and things that need to be implemented. Next slide, please. These are some of the challenges that each of these different teams face. You know, leadership really, you know, it's hard to finance a product that is, well, it's a what if. what if we're attacked, we need these protections, but what if we're not? So it's really getting them to see why this is important is our job, and letting them understand the threats that are out there today and what could happen if steps aren't taken. Security and IT understand the threats, but they don't understand the keys that make medical devices unique. It's just a connection on the end of the network in some cases. And as biomeds, it's our jobs to help them understand the key pieces of equipment that deliver healthcare and why we protect them and how we protect them without compromising their ability to deliver that healthcare. And biomeds, I think I covered what our roles are in this. So we're going to talk to Michael about Dartmouth-Hitchcock and some of their challenges and thought processes around why they went the direction that they did. So with that, Michael, what were some of the key factors that caused Dartmouth-Hitchcock to start looking at cybersecurity vendors?
So we are constantly looking at cybersecurity vendors for various purposes. We started looking specifically at ones that would address medical devices because of, we do an internal audit every year by a third party, and we change companies a couple of times just to get a different view of what our security profile looks like from the outside. And medical devices were identified as a key area that we are moving in the right direction, but we weren't moving very fast. We had the same struggles we had years ago. And to couple that with some of the other concerns, we regularly filter ECRIs, hazard recalls, all those things. And a huge portion of that workload was pointing at devices that would, potentially deliver inappropriate care, like calculate a field wrong, and it was dependent on the software version, or be insecure if it wasn't insulated on the right network, or was only relevant to these software versions. And we had to manually go and find those. And so it started to build up this queue of work orders that would require just an unfeasible amount of manpower to go look at each device and verify, or some pretty gross assumptions to say, okay, I've looked at this one infusion pump, and we're going to assume that all 1,500 are at the same software version. And we needed better tools to kind of address that workload. And we pushed that workload in accompanying with security's need to better lock down the medical equipment, to work with our network and security teams to drive a product that would help us get that information into one place so that we could have better confidence in the overall security.
So some of your key drivers there were gaining knowledge of what is on your network.
Yep.
And being able to identify accurately, what each one of those devices is doing and what is on those devices. So with that, how did you work together? What was the structure at Dartmouth when you were looking at these cybersecurity decisions, and who was working on this with you?
So we have a health information technology officer, and he owns all of the IT teams that are relevant to this. So it is kind of a single arm of that structure. And that is the IS security team, the networking team, and the clinical engineering team. We also had to work with a couple other groups as they relate to specific devices or systems, but those are the three main groups, and they all report to the same leadership. So it was good for us all to get on the same page, and we really put a lot of collaborative time and effort to sit with those groups on this subject and say, what is in this for you? What is in this for me? What is my struggle? How does this benefit all of us? And then where should this live? I think a big piece of this is really, is something like this truly a cybersecurity application, or is it a biomed application? Is it a network device? Who should own that, and where do we draw the lines? And so we had to kind of spend a lot of time to get a lot of familiarity with what those needs are, what the other groups are struggling with, and what's the right product for us to address all of that. Because these products are all tools, and it takes a lot of time to really let the knowledge and expertise of the use of that sink into our institution and get to the point where we're really leveraging those tools well.
And with the relationship between biomed and IT and security somewhat adversarial at times, how are you able to overcome those challenges and explain your unique needs to those teams in ways that they understand?
Yeah, it really is. We're very lucky at Dartmouth-Hitchcock in that we do have a lot of different IT teams, but we have a lot of different subject matter experts. And we speak quite often about the difference between influence and control. And so we control the medical device space, not necessarily the security protocols or policies, but we have influence over how those policies get applied to medical equipment. And it really takes time with the people involved to make sure that you know those needs, you have the right amount of expertise to be in that conversation, but you're very willing to say, that's not my expertise, I'm not the security team. I can only tell you what the medical device is doing. And I really want to bring in my friend from this other team to be that subject matter expert, because I don't want to speak to them. We know they have this. And that, there's not a shortcut that we've found. We started just having regular touch points without agendas with the security team, just acknowledging that we needed to work better together. Just probably a year before we implemented Ordr, to get that conversation started in a productive way and to know what those scope overlaps were.
So as you implemented your IoT security platform, what were some of the key things that you worked with security and networking to ensure that it would be successful?
The biggest thing we had to do was lay all of that out, ensure that leadership was involved and sponsoring the project, and then clearly lay out what each group needs to gain and what problems they see. And then for us, having all the teams evaluate possible vendors really helped lay out who could use this product and who couldn't. And that was surprisingly specific. There's a lot of similarities between a lot of cybersecurity tools. And the bottom line differentiator for us was really, we have Cisco MDX tools, and we chose teams that were most comfortable with our subject matter experts working with the infrastructure that we had. And that way we didn't have to do a lot of education back and forth with the vendor or whoever we brought in. We were bringing in partners that were familiar with the tool sets we already had. And so we weren't trying to reinvent farther than we needed to. We were just adding to an existing stack of collaborative tools. And so that was surprisingly informative. I really expected that we could have picked from a wide variety of these, but when it got down to what the network team needed out of it and what the security team was expecting to see, we really found there were far fewer options of teams that could technologically support our existing tools and weren't going to try and push us into different firewall tools or different network infrastructure or different ICE protocols, that kind of thing. And that's why it was really helpful for us to let them be their own subject matter experts. I know at other institutions that the term clinical engineer can be a lot of gray area. And for instance, we have an interface build team, and at other institutions, I know they would be clinical engineers, but we let the EMR integrations team own from there out, and we kind of keep our narrow slice. And that's good and bad in that, the size of our department, but it does give us very clear subject matter experts when we have some of these questions. We know who should own it.
It's very good. You've had, how long has your implementation been? A little over 2 years? Is that...
We've been talking about it that long. It really got put in place as a pilot in December and fully soaking data from all of our affiliate hospitals in January.
Okay. And so you had a little bit of time to ingest the data and look back at what was done and what decisions were made. What are some of the, if you could go back and change anything, is there anything that you did that you kind of are rethinking now, or you could kind of do a lessons learned about your implementation?
I think the biggest lesson learned would be really to understand and get a better network diagram to our customers and our clinical teams about how many VLANs and how many networks are out there. We had largely a very successful implementation early on, but we found that there are more and more complicated virtual network structures that are involved in medical equipment than we thought. And we really underestimated the amount of personal IoMT devices out there, the number of smart speakers that are in patient rooms, and the number of ways in which we expected certain medical devices to really only need to talk to, their gateway or the PACS or, one point of contact. And they needed more contacts than that. And we weren't able to see that they get their licensing from one server and then they check in with a third server and then they check to the gateway. And so some of those network communication pieces would have been nicer to understand or have documentation on ahead of time. And I think we learned that through this process, but our network teams kind of reinforced their desire to have that documented in a way that they could communicate. And in some ways, this has really helped them put those diagrams together. And in other ways, it was just something they hadn't managed to get to yet. They had all the best intentions, but everybody's got something on the back burner.
What was the, even medical or non-medical, what was the most unique thing you found on the network that you didn't know was out there, or your ministry didn't know was out there?
Echo speakers and Google Smart speakers. And they were being added to our personal network so that people could use them in their offices to play music or whatever it was. But there's a shocking amount of those that sneak in all over the place, and they really do have a ton of network traffic. They are always communicating. So we have forthcoming policies governing those because they are so sensitive and so able to record so much information.
And those were found in places that could have compromised HIPAA information?
Potentially, if recording and it gets into that terms of service, and do you want to constantly monitor those terms of service? Like if the device is always capable of recording and it's in a space, you now can't speak about patient information in that space unless you really understand those terms of service and you really know it's not recording at this time. And we didn't want to trust those terms of service outright or monitor them. They change too often and they're too in depth for us to want to kind of hinge our HIPAA policies on those terms of service.
So then was the policy created to basically not allow them into the areas, or was the policy to restrict where they could be, or how was that handled?
It's still a little bit up in the air. That policy is not quite finalized. I expect they will not be allowed on anything that's outward facing, and they will be allowed on a guest network that doesn't allow that communication to go out.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult solution there. It's I always found when I was when I was at Biomed, when the music didn't work in the OR, it was more important than a piece of equipment not working in the OR. And we would, the frantic calls we would get because they couldn't hear their music. It always shocked me, but it's those little things that do make people's lives better and easier, that really do matter to people. And if we can help them, we should. What would you recommend for other HDM departments to strengthen those internal partnerships with networking and security, and allowing us to bridge some of the gaps that we've seen?
Yeah, I think for us it was really getting past what that team does and into the next level of that team is made of these 6 people and ICE is really these 2 guys and your Cisco infrastructure is really these 3 guys, and knowing how deep they are in those things and where they want to move. We knew where the lines were drawn. We knew what was network support and when to call networking. We didn't necessarily work with them in depth enough to know who was which subject matter expert and where they wanted to expand. And this process and a few others that we've been working on have really helped us understand how our future scopes overlap And part of that is just the inflection point that Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health is at. We are expanding into more hospitals, and we have been an affiliate network for some time, but we're really just now getting through our 4th hospital integration project, and that's making the network all one and having us all use the same tools and standardizing on this generation of equipment life cycles and really getting to a single set of tools. And that is a huge chunk of work, but keeping those teams together is making all of those future endeavors easier to be collaborative on, because when something comes up in that gray area with another customer, we have more to say than just that's network. We can say, I'm pretty sure this is the tool they're going to point you towards. This is the right person on that team. They're somewhere in this. This is what their next bandwidth looks like. We can really help our customers navigate that request and get to the final endpoint they want to get to. And we weren't as steeped in that knowledge 2 years ago.
Very good. I had a question and it just completely lost train of thought there. It'll come back to me. What teams are responsible ultimately for protecting IoT, IoMT devices at Dartmouth-Hitchcock?
It ultimately depends on the use case in some instances. Like some IoMT devices are very much clinical devices, and so I really own the endpoints and then making sure that they get put on the right networks, and if possible, we have the device hardening standards so they don't use generic passwords, that kind of thing. But if it's not a medical device for treatment, diagnosis, therapy, it is an IT device that lives in a clinical space, it's a different team. Those policies are all owned by the security team, so they have the influence, and their endpoint providers have the control. And that is usually myself, a network team, or an application support team, which is one of 2 groups. Just kind of, our IT is split into a shocking number of teams, which is the other side of the coin here, is that we have a lot of IT teams, and it does sometimes take a couple of head scratchings and looking through the org chart to figure out who's the right person and where this should live. But it's one of 4 endpoint users at that point.
How is that documented, or is that just common knowledge among employees? How are you conveying that so that people know where to go and when to go?
To our customers, it's really one of 2 places, or I guess 3, because some of them are owned by facilities, and they can call any one of those service desks, and that request will get resolved in the back end. They don't always, we can't expect those customers who are clinically focused and don't get trained on our 6 different ticketing systems and the many different support teams that are here as to which team is really handling the issue. They just need to know that we are taking it and we will make sure it gets into the right ticketing system and that it gets handled. And so, sometimes the line between that is a temperature sensor that's for pharmacy, so it's part of a clinical system, or that's a temperature sensor just for the HVAC that needs to go to engineering, is lost on our end users, but it is defined by the use case, and that is documented by each team's scope of work. And for those of us in those groups, we do sit down with our collaborative ticketing systems. We regularly attend like the IT help desk meeting just to say, these are some that got crossed over. Did they cross over well? There is gray area, and we can't eliminate the gray area, but we can make sure that our customers don't suffer through the gray area. And it's a little bit of a non-answer. It's not that we've fixed that problem. We certainly haven't solved cybersecurity at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, but we're working through it, and we have some good pieces and some pieces we still need to work on.
Yeah, I think everybody would agree. No one's solved the problem, otherwise we're talking about it. My previous question that came back to me, you talked about onboarding new facilities. Have you implemented your IoT security software at those to help in identifying devices that are at that facility?
Since we've had it, we have only onboarded 1, and it is not yet actually soaking up data from that, but I expect that to start in the next month. So we should have our first, and this is really one of security's clear hopes of an application like this, is to get a better picture of what's in the building, what's communicating with what, and who is communicating outside, who is communicating inside, and is the list of tools the customer is saying they need supported really showing up, or are a few more sneaking in there? And we've done this by importing biomed inventories into our CMMS, and we've done this saying that's not a very good inventory, we have to conduct a whole new one. Security's done the same thing, and this will be a great test case to see how well that works. And if it works as well as we hope, it'll at least clear some better initial conversations, because we're never going to eliminate any gotchas down the road, but it should clear that initial hurdle with a lot more information.
Thank you. I'm assuming your guest network is also monitored by your IoMT. Have you found any medical devices that have found their way to the guest network that were patient-owned or physician-owned?
Yes, but not through the application itself. We actually usually found it via another method and then confirmed that via Ordr. Part of that is because we're still doing data validation to integrate that system Ordr with the CMMS. And so we don't have the flags in place saying this is a clinical engineering device, or we think this should be a clinical engineering device. And that's sort of where we're headed in the near future. Most of the use cases for my team for Ordr are still manual, but we expect in the next couple of months to get through that data validation and start seeing some of that happen in an automated fashion, and getting that directly in the CMMS in front of our technicians, instead of putting it to a clinical engineer to reach out to another tool and verify. And so that's further leveraging the tool like we talked about earlier. We're almost at that inflection point, and I'm really excited for that one in particular.
And outside of the traditional securing IoMT devices, have you found any other use cases for a product like this that helps in the day-to-day lives of a clinical engineer or a biomed?
Absolutely. It has really helped close a surprising amount of the recalls that come in because of software version XYZ that is not always captured by the CMMS or updated sometime during the life of the equipment. Verifying those revisions via Ordr has saved a lot of groundwork in being able to, with confidence, close those hazard recalls, say they are not applicable, or verified they've been done.
That's very helpful. I know it's a struggle when you get to the device and you found it and you find out you didn't need to do anything, and
yeah,
it's just a little frustrating. I've been there.
Another next use case we're very excited about is the utilization piece of it. And I have high hopes, but it'll be very interesting to see how much network utilization really translates to physical utilization. For example, an ultrasound that gets largely used throughout ICUs and then goes back to the cardio echo department and gets plugged in will only show network traffic when it comes back and gets plugged in, because they don't want to be transferring all the time. But if we can differentiate that is 4 studies or 6 studies, it still gives us a better piece of utilization than we're having right now. So that's another set of data that we really have to kind of scrutinize to see how useful it is, and can we decide where it's most useful and where it's not easily. But that's a really great usage for us. Utilization it's kind of a hot topic across hospitals, trying to squeeze efficiency out of the system.
So what that would be one, is deciding on if a piece of additional equipment is needed, if equipment is overutilized, if underutilized, it can be moved to another location. Have you considered using that data to schedule your preventative maintenance?
Yes, we've thought about it. It's sort of far in the future. We're also looking at more of an RTLS approach to that. If the RTLS system can tie us to rooms with the EMR telling us there's a discharge in that room, we're trying to take that actionable approach first. So this space is open, these devices are in that space. What will have to tie in later is the mapping of ports and network devices to that same space. And that's the approach we're taking. So it's just a little farther down the road with Ordr. We're more concerned with the devices that float and are stuck in patient rooms for a very long time. Networked equipment is a little bit easier for us to track most of the time.
Mm-hmm. So you're using RTLS, I'm assuming, like on infusion pumps and
Yes.
stuff of that nature?
Yep.
Okay, so your movable medical devices. Have you found any other use cases for movable medical devices that Ordr helps with outside of physically locating them?
Physically locating, confirming sort of the network traffic and the directions of those, and hazard recalls are our biggest uses at this time. I don't have too many other. We have some other in like the blue sky future vision that we'd like to see, but I'm not sure exactly what approach we're going to take on those yet. We're kind of tiptoeing through the next few months and seeing how well this works.
So speaking of that future, is there any key areas that you think that as this technology grows that we should focus on, and problems that we should focus towards fixing that this technology is capable of doing?
You know, not having the network subject matter expertise, I would like to see, we have many future proposals for equipment that is sending data through the cloud instead of local storage. And some of that is HIPAA protected data. There are really mobile, cheap ultrasound systems now. There are data storage for physiological monitoring systems, and vendors are really pushing a cost savings through sending to the clouds. And we can't always confirm that that is the only place it is sending. And this kind of network visibility could let us allow some of those things that we haven't previously, because we have better visibility of what that connection path is, and we can react faster to close it down. So those security evaluations, which aren't done by our team, they're done by security, and network does the, you know, into specific incidents. But we can be better partners, and we could potentially allow some of those solutions that we previously have really prohibited. And I would like to see being able to compare data from other institutions or run pilots to test that using this
More of a cloud, or more of a group sourcing, cloud sourcing type of approach to it. It's very interesting. Have you run into any situations where your IoT tool was used to troubleshoot issues that made it quicker or easier to find a solution?
We haven't yet, but part of that is because we're not having all of our technicians directly logging into the IoT solution. They're aware of it, but we're pretty cognizant and taking the strategy of keeping the number of tools they have to keep open limited. So they'll have access to this data once it's validated and brought into the CMMS, and they know how to reach out to the people who have it. But we're not, you know, there's so many disparate systems that we try and make it so that the technicians doing their work don't have to have 7 different tools open. And this is one that I'm not aware that it's come up in troubleshooting. I think the PACS folks have used it in a signal that, you know, got sent to the wrong system in their network diagrams, but I'm not certain that it's come about in actual device troubleshooting yet. I think it's possible, but we're not quite spreading that information wide enough to see if that happens.
Very good. I think we have 2 questions, and I want to make sure they get answered. Do we want to not pull those up? This one is for Mike. Are you able to let us know which IoT security systems you implemented? Does scope include just medical devices, monitoring, or all IT assets?
We're using Ordr for our IoMT, and we are screening on all VLANs at all affiliate hospitals for all devices, except for one. We have one affiliate hospital bring on board. So that is looking into every space at this point.
Thank you. This one's, can Mike explain how non-generic passwords are managed by Biomed? A little outside of the, I guess, Ordr, but it's a very good question.
Yeah. So our older devices, and I think most of you will find this too, they come with a generic password and you're stuck with it. We're getting the next generation of equipment now that lets you set that generic password. We are using a password log keeper that is encrypted for our technicians. We largely choose variations on similar passwords to keep that kind of cognizant, because one has a mandatory 4 digits, one has a mandatory 5 digits. But we are setting those whenever possible. And a lot of those efforts for us come down to being more involved in the supply chain process. So if we can ask for an MDS squared and ask those cybersecurity concerns before the device is bought, we are much better off in implementing that quickly and not just throwing it on the network because it needs to be used now, when we have the time to really ask those questions long before and push on some of those answers. Because you guys have probably experienced, vendors aren't always, the sales staff is not the same as the technical staff that will answer those questions, and they're not always thrilled with making those changes, but we can in some cases.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Is there any more there?
I don't know. They can, if it did not, just type the question back in the Q&A if we want to elaborate a little more. Does the solution help drive your capital or operational spend decisions?
Not yet. Like I said, utilization data is really a future prospect, and I would love to see utilization better involved in the supply chain acquisition discussion, but it's not mature enough, and we don't have it in front of a wide enough audience to really say that that is used at this point. So we'll see it if we get contingency, emergency, we need more we need justification to replace this equipment, one-offs, but we're not really using it in a structured format. It's not something we're checking as we make fleet decisions.
Okay, and this is kind of a question leading into that. What questions would you like to have answered based on utilization data?
Really, percentage usage during business hours, and then days or times that are the peak. We want to know how often they're used. Our favorite use case is we had 2 portable ultrasounds in neighboring clinics. One got used Mondays and Wednesdays. One got used Thursdays and Fridays because of how they scheduled their providers and their tests, but they both needed ultrasounds. They both don't need ultrasounds. Mm-hmm. There are many cases like that, and we just aren't smart enough to see through it. And the wall between that department was the wall between all the information. So I really want to see how often and when.
So transporting that device is an option between the 2 facilities as opposed to purchasing 2 devices?
They're physical neighbors. It's a doorway and the device is on wheels.
Ah, gotcha. We had some challenges with wanting to move equipment, and it ended up being a long-term a bad decision due to the maintenance required once it was moved, and the inability for the company to move it properly. What is Dartmouth-Hitchcock's long-term plan for securing medical devices that cannot be patched?
Access control lists, absolutely. Micro-segmentation, understanding what it needs to talk to, how often, and really keeping it on that. That is, my understanding, is really the only approach that we could scale, because most devices that are specific enough to not really allow patching or not get updated frequently are not our fleet devices that we have integrated to major systems and number in the hundreds and thousands. Those are 1s and 2s in specific applications that are really only used by this research group or that one physician. Those are the oddities, and so the best way is really just to understand what they most need to communicate with and lock it down from everything else.
And application ICE is going to be your main application for that. Yep. Was that a key decision maker in what you chose for your IoT security product?
Yes. So our network team was already developing internal expertise on ICE and with Cisco and standardizing that as we move through our affiliate hospitals and developing internal talent on those tools. And we really only had one network engineer who was kind of the ICE guru, and he has since grown and trained some of his team. He now had 2 or 3 guys we can go to in that space, and really making sure that we brought in a partner who understood those tools and didn't need us to educate them on how to make it work with their system was a key comfort factor. And we brought in Ordr to, in many ways, be the customer of it. My provider for Ordr is the network team and the security team. I receive data from Ordr and we validate it and use it in the CMMS, but I am not the subject matter expert on networking or security. And so we really wanted to make sure that we brought in a product that they were not going to balk at supporting and developing, and we're going to have reasons they wanted to continue using it so that it didn't become defunct or not part of our standard toolkit. We wanted to bring in something that they were going to own and really hold so that we could continue to receive the data we want from it.
Have you, at this point, have you successfully implemented an ICE policy around a single medical device?
Yes, there are a few, specifically our Philips monitoring installation, VLAN, and ICE for infusion pumps. There's a couple other small examples, but in general, those are the big ones.
And was that done before Ordr or after?
After, in the initial phases. And I'd have to ask the network group to see exactly how much Ordr data fed into those control loops and the development of those. I don't know too much about how they actually went about that process.
There was no attempts to implement any ICE policies before that?
They had ICE policies. It wasn't thoroughly leveraged. We also moved from another infusion pump model to a new one after Ordr was implemented. So we instituted the ICE policy after the new model was deployed.
Okay, we're going back to the questions. How successful do you think this project would be if you did not engage network and cyber?
I wouldn't know what to do with all the data we have. I don't think we would be seeing all the VLANs. I don't have enough clinical engineers to support it. I wouldn't have the time to send those clinical engineers to the appropriate education spaces. We wouldn't have done a whole lot of anything with the information that Ordr provided. We probably wouldn't have made it past the pilot scope without those teams. And I don't think I could have done anything.
So it's really not a possibility to implement something like this without the buy-in from those teams?
Not in the way that we did it. And some clinical engineering teams have much wider scope than we do, and they might have the internal expertise to really dedicate some resources to supporting this, and they might have the ability to get into all of those network VLANs and such, but we absolutely didn't. We would have fallen right in our face.
Okay, so this is a long one. We'll probably break it up into a couple questions here. How long did it take to correctly, for you to correct device classification? How long did it take you to get correct device classifications?
Is that in medical device versus non-medical device, IoT, you think?
I think
that's my interpretation.
Yeah.
We have, I think, about 6,000 devices that are showing as medical devices, and we are validating that now on a week-to-week basis. We're increasing our confidence in that automated label and adjusting exactly what gets that label automatically. So, you know, with COVID, it's taken us 10 months to start to get device classifications that we have confidence in. They've been there since the beginning. They've gotten better since the beginning, but we haven't had the bandwidth to be doing that screening to the point that we're bringing it into the CMMS until very recently. So some of that is the condensed COVID project schedule we had, and some of that is the bandwidth of our clinical engineers, but you probably could do it within a month of soaking up data if you had the bandwidth and you really addressed it initially.
This is, are you having to manually classify devices, or are you working with Ordr to make sure that the signatures flows are seen?
We are able to adjust with Ordr how they automate or how they label those and how the medical device label comes about. And this is another gray area. Some places view PACS viewing stations as medical devices and tag them in the CMMS. Some places view that as an IT device, a medical data system, not a medical device. So we are able to be flexible with Ordr in how that gets assigned. And then there's a further layer of refining that data as we import it that is not settled on. So that data comes into the CMMS, and then at that point we have raw data. We can filter before it gets tied to assets, and then we confirm back to Ordr if we sort of accepted this as a CMMS clinical engineering supported device. And so then our partners in security and networking can see this is recognized as a CE device.
And this is, have you had any issues with the hardware for your IoT system?
Absolutely not. We did have one change that I actually haven't seen the root cause analysis last week. We made a networking change, and Ordr was at play here. We're really not sure exactly, fault and what happened, but a change that was made on the networking side did cause some outages, and Ordr was at least a functional player in this. So root cause analysis pending, but it's certainly something that you do have to know, and your network team has to be cognizant of, because it is sending network traffic to so many spaces or receiving traffic from so many spaces.
How do you identify it as a clinical engineering device in Ordr? Tagging.
That's the $1 million question. You're in the right space. We are using if the MAC address is documented in the CMMS and matches the format and matches Ordr as the gold standard. If the MAC address can't be matched either because we didn't catalog it in the CMMS or it doesn't match a device, we are looking into right now. And so we've imported those devices. What we don't have is if the manufacturer matches and we can show a software version or something else that kind of correlates the device, can we then bring in all that data without that MAC address? And some of the struggles there are the network packet that displays the manufacturer doesn't match the exact syntax of how ECRI lists the manufacturer. So it's not a perfect one-to-one match. We can't go by IP address because our CMMS isn't dynamically picking those up, and most of them are on DHCP. So that is the active work that we are currently doing. Beyond MAC address matches and it's perfect, we don't have the exact answer yet. We'll let you know when I get the secret sauce.
Do you have DHCP integration with Ordr?
Yes. Host names for lots of systems should help. Host name manufacturer would likely be good enough, but we're currently pulling all those, like show me all the devices that match on both manufacturer and host name compared to the CMMS, or whatever we can pull, and then screening how valid we think those are. And if they're high, we're going to pull them into the CMMS.
And resolving that MAC is a really key part of that, correct? As
Yes.
a unique identifier.
And not every device has just one MAC. And sometimes the most visible MAC to the internal software, you pull up the Unix terminal and ask your IP config, it'll show you a MAC address, but that's not the one that the switch sees when you plug it into the wall. And so how do we handle multiple MAC address devices? And the worst case is really devices with USB dongles that manage their Wi-Fi. And so, the device shows up as ComNet. It's just a USB, but really that's plugged into the medical device we care about, whether it's a C-arm or an ultrasound or whatever it is. Those are particularly difficult.
Makes you appreciate that network services doesn't like having them in the picture. Okay. We think we've made it through. Oh, let me see one more here. I mentioned tool clinical engineering. Do you plan to send all the data? You mentioned reducing the tools for clinical engineering. Do you plan to send all the data from Ordr to your CMS or CMMS and have clinical engineers access the data from there?
We differentiate. We have a handful of clinical engineers and we have a large number of biomedical equipment technicians, radiology technicians. So right now the access is given to clinical engineers who are looking in Ordr and screening the data and working on bringing that into the CMMS. The biomed and radiology technicians currently don't see that data from Ordr in the CMMS, and we are going to put that in front of them. We can get them access, we can show it to them. We've done it on one-off basis. You know, I have this device, I'm trying to find it, this is happening. They know the tool is out there, but it's just reducing another tool that they need to have access to and up all the time. When we get the CMMS data largely brought in from Ordr, my hope is that as that sinks in and we start to leverage this tool, the expectation becomes the culture. And so if you're used to logging into the CMMS and seeing what's the MAC address, what's its utilization, where's the last place it connected to, what's going on with this device, and you don't, you are likely to then populate the MAC address the next time you see that device, and that will get us the information in there. But if it's not your current expectation to see that much information, it doesn't stand out as an oddity or something that's missing information. And that's always the like slow turnover of culture in getting this kind of data entry and data quality. We weren't used to seeing purchase prices on most devices 5-6 years ago because we didn't get POs with devices. And now if we see one that comes in without a dollar amount, we go back and find it. We kind of hold the device until we get the purchasing information so that we can track equipment lifecycle cost. And this is just another iteration of that same kind of data quality change that we're trying to push.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We've reached the end of the questions that have come in so far. Kamisha, can we pull the slides back up? I think we need to be on 10. So since we brought this up, Ordr is the product that Dartmouth-Hitchcock is using. And this is just kind of a overview of the product. It's an AI-powered IoT security platform, hitting many different parts of your network, including IoMT devices, IoT devices, your traditional devices as well. There's a lot of stuff there that it can be done. And it's a passive system, so you're not installing anything on the local systems. And we wanted to, if you go to the next slide, please, just wanted to make you aware of a program where you can get a free device that will do this, and it is 100% free. It goes on a reproductive port or a span port on your network, and unintrusively maps all this information for 30 days, and then you're giving a report at the end. So just a real quick plug for that. It's a really good way to get a look at your network with no strings attached. Are there any additional questions for myself or Mike? Mike, anything you'd like to add at the end? Any key things that we haven't discussed already?
No, I think that was pretty thorough. I just want to thank you guys for inviting me. Thank you for all the good questions. I think you kind of held me to it. I know I'm sure there's something I forgot. It's been an interesting process, and you know, we certainly are not the end-all be-all of cybersecurity. I think we've taken a nice approach, and it's really improved our collaborative efforts. But you know, most years we'd be at MD Expo and Amy and asking those questions of other teams, and always interested to hear what everyone else has done. Everyone's got their own take on where these blurry lines get drawn and how they navigate those spaces. And cybersecurity is full of that for clinical engineering.
All right. Well, Kamisha, thank you very much for hosting. Do you have any closing comments or anything? You're muted.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can.
Thank you both so much for such a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you. I want to remind everyone that if you're not a member of ACCE, please join. Make sure you check out this link right here and check out the membership categories and application details, including the qualification requirements. As a member of ACCE, you will gain great benefits, including access to a community of clinical engineers who are your peers and who are also experts on all things HTM. You'll get updates on timely topics via our newsletter and complimentary receptions for face-to-face meetups at Amy and HIMSS. There are discounts available for educational content, journals, and registrations to major conferences. So we really encourage you to sign up and join ACCE. As well, please be sure to complete the survey at the end of this webinar. So I want to thank Ben and Mike once again, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.